In the quiet stillness of an abandoned motel, a rusted metal trunk was discovered 5 years after a road trip meant to mend a relationship had gone silent. The secrets it held were unexpected, raising more questions than answers about what truly happened to Jake and Emily. In the summer of 2017, Jake Warren, a 26-year-old with sandy brown hair and an easy smile, saw the world through the lens of his camera. Photography was more than a hobby. It was his passion, his form of expression. He was the kind of person who could walk into any room and make friends in minutes. Emily Carter, 24, possessed a quiet intensity that was a perfect contrast. A master's student in environmental science, she filled notebooks with observations about the natural world, her thoughtful eyes missing no detail. Their story began 3 years earlier at a coffee shop near campus, a chance encounter where Jake's camera sparked a 4-hour conversation. They discovered a mutual love for road trips, dreaming of seeing America the way their grandparents had, slowly, deliberately, through forgotten highways and small towns. By 2017, the demands of their lives had created a chasm between them. Emily's graduate studies consumed her time, while Jake's freelance photography meant unpredictable income and long periods away. Their easy laughter had been replaced by frequent arguments, and the initial spark seemed to be fading. It was Emily who suggested the trip. "We need this," she told her sister, Sarah. "We need to remember why we fell in love." The plan was a 2-week journey from Massachusetts to California, following the old, rarely traveled Route 6. Jake agreed immediately, seeing a perfect opportunity to document the overlooked corners of America. He trusted Emily's scientific mind to find fascinating details he might miss, and she relied on his artistic eye to capture the beauty of the journey. They were, in essence, perfect travel partners. Their planning was meticulous. Emily created detailed itineraries, researching every historical site and small town. Jake mapped out every potential photo opportunity and scenic viewpoint. They deliberately avoided chain hotels, choosing instead to book rooms at family-owned motels for a more authentic experience. The night before their departure, Emily's mother called, her voice filled with apprehension. "Are you sure about this, honey?" she asked. "Some of those small towns can be." Emily cut her off, confident in their plan. "Mom, we'll be fine. It's 2017, not 1950. Besides, Jake's with me." Her mother, knowing her daughter was smart and independent, put her fears to rest. On June 15, 2017, they hit the road in Jake's blue Honda Civic, which was packed with everything they'd need. Emily had made sandwiches, and Jake had packed extra batteries and film for his vintage Polaroid. Their journey was documented instantly on Instagram, with Jake at the wheel and Emily navigating with an old paper map. The first few days were everything they'd hoped for, discovering small diners with the best coffee, laughing at quirky roadside attractions, and watching breathtaking sunsets over endless cornfields. Emily kept a travel journal, filling its pages with not just where they went, but how they felt. She wrote about the light in Jake's eyes when he found the perfect shot and the feeling of falling for him all over again. On day 3, they stopped at a tiny diner in Ohio. The waitress, who had worked there for 30 years, shared stories of travelers who had passed through. Emily noted in her journal, "Jake took her picture by the window. I think we're remembering why we worked so well together." By day 5 in Missouri, they were charmed by a motel owner's dog that followed them everywhere. Emily wrote, "Jake's getting better at talking to strangers for his project. I love watching him work." Their friends and followers were now completely invested, living vicariously through their adventure. Emily's sister, Sarah, checked their posts religiously, sometimes calling just to hear about their day firsthand. By day 7, they had reached the stunning mountains of Colorado, which were even more beautiful than they had imagined. Jake was shooting 3 rolls of film a day, while Emily collected plant samples and took detailed notes on elevation and soil composition. Their social media posts showed genuine smiles, inside jokes, and the easy comfort of a couple rediscovering each other. It seemed the distance and arguments from home had dissolved with every passing mile. But their newfound happiness was about to be shattered. On June 22nd, they arrived in Clear Creek, Colorado, a small town of about 800 people surrounded by mountain wilderness. They planned to stay one night at the Valley Pines Motel, a family-run establishment with individual cabin-style rooms. Emily's last Instagram photo was posted at 6:47 p.m., showing them standing in front of their cabin, room 12, with the mountains in the background. Jake's arm was around her shoulders, and they were both squinting into the late afternoon sun. The caption read, "Mountains and good company. Last push tomorrow to Utah." The desk clerk, a college student named Danny Morrison, remembered them clearly. They seemed like any other tired but friendly couple. Jake had asked about good spots for sunrise photography, and Emily had inquired about hiking trails. They seemed normal, Danny later told police. Maybe a little tired but happy. The guy was really into his camera stuff. However, other guests at the motel that night recalled a different story. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman staying in room 10, 2 doors down, heard intense voices from their room around 10 p.m. She couldn't make out the words but knew it was a serious conversation between a man and a woman. Around 11:30 p.m., she heard fast footsteps in the hallway. By the time she looked through her peephole, whoever it was had already passed. At 11:47 p.m., Emily sent a final text message to her sister, Sarah. "I don't like the way that guy in the lobby keeps looking at us. Call you tomorrow." Sarah, who was already asleep, didn't see the message until the next morning. By then, it was too late. The road trip that was supposed to save them had reached a chilling and mysterious end. Danny Morrison got to the Valley Pines Motel for his morning shift at 7 a.m. on June 23rd. He noticed the parking space in front of room 12 was empty. The blue Honda Civic that had been there was gone. This didn't seem strange to him. Lots of guests left early to avoid traffic or to see the sunrise from a beautiful lookout. But when the housekeeping staff knocked on the door of room 12 at 10 a.m., there was no reply. They used their key to go inside. The room was tidy. In fact, it was too tidy. The bed was made with sharp, hospital-style corners, something the motel's housekeepers certainly had not done when they cleaned the room the previous evening. All of Jake and Emily's things were gone. Their clothes, their camera gear, and Emily's journals had all vanished. The only clues that they had ever stayed there were 2 coffee cups left in the sink and a small damp patch on the carpet near the window. It looked like someone had spilled water and done their best to wipe it up. Danny called the number that Jake had written on his registration form. No one picked up. He tried Emily's number and it went straight to voicemail. "We thought they had just checked out early and forgotten to return their key," Danny explained later. "It happens more than you'd think." But Emily's sister, Sarah, was beginning to feel uneasy. Emily had promised to call. Emily always kept her promises. When Sarah's calls kept going to voicemail, she felt a first, cold hint of fear. By that afternoon, Sarah was calling every few hours. By evening, she was calling the motel directly. "They checked out this morning," Danny told her. "Probably left around dawn, I'd guess." But Sarah knew her sister. Emily did not go anywhere at dawn unless it was an emergency. Emily hated waking up early. She would have called. That night, Sarah called their parents. By the next morning, the whole family was calling the police. The Clear Creek Police Department was not set up for a big missing persons case. For 15 years, Chief Rodriguez had mostly handled small-time theft and drunk driving. Missing tourists were unusual, and they almost always showed up within a day or two, feeling embarrassed that they had forgotten to call home. But everything changed on June 25th when Jake's Honda Civic was found. The car was 12 miles outside of Clear Creek, parked at a trailhead that led into the Rocky Mountain wilderness. The doors were locked. The keys were missing. Inside, the police found Jake's backup camera bag and Emily's hiking boots. That's when we knew this wasn't just a case of someone forgetting to call, Chief Rodriguez said later. People don't go hiking into the mountains without their boots. The car had been sitting there for at least 2 days, maybe 3. A park ranger had noticed it but assumed the owners were out on a long backpacking trip. Now, it seemed threatening, left alone among the pine trees with no reason. Search and rescue teams spent a week looking through the wilderness. They found nothing. No footprints on the trails, no signs of a campsite, no proof that Jake and Emily had ever gone into those mountains. The investigation moved back to Clear Creek. Police talked to every guest who had stayed at the Valley Pines Motel that night. Most had already checked out and moved on, but everyone they could find told the same story. It was a quiet night. The young couple seemed normal. Nothing seemed out of place. Except for one person, Mrs. Henderson. She told the police about the voices, the footsteps, and the feeling of urgency she had heard through the walls. Something was wrong, she insisted. I've been married for 43 years. I know what it sounds like when people are in serious trouble. Jake's parents drove 18 hours without stopping from Massachusetts. Emily's family came right after them. They stayed in Clear Creek's only hotel and turned the lobby into their own search headquarters. The families made thousands of flyers. They went to every business in town and every gas station for 100 miles in every direction. When the local police seemed in over their heads, they hired a private investigator. Sarah, Emily's sister, became the voice of the search. She did interviews on local news, posted on social media, and put together groups of volunteers to help look. She couldn't stop thinking that Emily's last text message was important. She said, "That guy in the lobby," Sarah told everyone who would listen. She was specific. It wasn't just a general worry. Someone was making her nervous. But the lobby at the Valley Pines Motel was just a small front desk area. Danny Morrison was the only worker on duty that night. He promised he had not talked to Jake and Emily after they checked in. He hadn't even seen them after they went to their room. Maybe she meant another guest, Danny suggested. But the registration book showed only 5 rooms were occupied that night, and the police had spoken to all of them. The private investigator, a former Denver police detective named Marcus Flynn, started looking harder. He found something that made everyone feel cold with fear. Over the last 15 years, 7 other people had gone missing along that same part of Route 6. They were all young travelers. They were all last seen at a small motel. They had all disappeared without leaving a trace. "This isn't random," Flynn told the families. "This is a pattern." The first one to disappear was in 2003. A college student named Michael Torres was driving by himself from Denver to see his family in Utah. He was last seen at a motel in Riverside, Colorado, 40 miles from where Jake and Emily went missing. His car was found a week later in a totally different town. There was no sign of Michael. In 2007, a young couple from Texas, Lisa and David Reeves, vanished from a motel in Millfield. Their RV was found left behind at a rest stop 3 towns away. In 2011, Rachel Martinez, a nurse who traveled for work, disappeared from a motel in Pine Ridge. Her car was found 2 weeks later in a grocery store parking lot 60 miles away. In 2014, another couple, Mark and Jennifer Walsh, were last seen at a motel in Cedar Falls. All in small towns, all along Route 6, all at budget motels run by local families. All the people who went missing were in their 20s or early 30s. All their cars were found many miles from where they were last seen, always left in places that didn't make sense. Flynn made a map and put a red pin where each person had disappeared. The pattern was frightening. Someone was hunting along Route 6, picking victims from quiet roadside motels and making them vanish without a clue. But who was doing it and how? The FBI finally got involved. Agent Patricia Wells came to Clear Creek with a team of experts. They reopened all the old, unsolved cases, searching for any links Flynn might have overlooked. What they found was even more worrying. Agent Wells found that several of the motels where people had vanished were connected. Not on paper, they were all separately owned, but a single maintenance and supply company called Rocky Mountain Services worked for many of them. Rocky Mountain Services was owned by a man named Thomas Briggs. He was 62 years old and lived by himself in a cabin outside of Cedar Falls. For 20 years, he had run his small business, doing everything from fixing pipes to killing bugs for cheap motels all over the area. Briggs had access to rooms, keys, and schedules. He knew when guests were arriving and leaving. He could enter and leave these motels without anyone thinking it was suspicious. When agents went to his cabin to talk to him, they found it empty. People living nearby said they hadn't seen him in months. His business phone had been turned off. His bank accounts were closed. Thomas Briggs had disappeared just as completely as the people he may have hurt. But there was no solid proof tying him to the disappearances. No fingerprints, no witnesses who could identify him, no records, just the fact that he was near the motels and had the chance, which wasn't enough to charge him with a crime, even if they could have found him. The families were heartbroken. They had felt so close to getting answers, but now they had even more questions. Where was Thomas Briggs? Was he the one who had taken 8 people? And if he was, what had he done with them? Months went by, and then years. The FBI team was moved to other cases. The families never gave up looking, but all leads had gone cold. Jake and Emily Warren Carter became another mystery that was never solved. They became another set of missing posters that slowly faded in the sun until new tragedies took their place. Then in 2023, something changed. For more than 10 years, the Red Haven Lodge had stood empty and forgotten before the demolition crew showed up. Originally constructed in the 1950s, the lodge had shut its doors in the early 2000s after the new interstate highway drew traffic away from the old routes. For 4 years, it sat alone, its windows covered with boards, while weeds pushed their way through the broken asphalt of the parking lot. It was a lonely piece of America's roadside history. The town of Millbrook had made the choice to finally tear it down. The plan was to turn the land into a small park, something that would serve the community better than a crumbling building. On March 14, 2023, the demolition team started their job. While cleaning out the inside of the building, the crew chief, Ramon Martinez, saw something strange in a storage room located behind the main office. The door to the room was locked, but not with a normal lock. Instead, it was held shut by a heavy-duty padlock, the sort people use on storage units. The metal door was marked with dents and scratches, as though someone had tried to break in a long time ago but hadn't succeeded. Martinez told his crew it was probably just old hotel supplies, but his own curiosity won out. They cut the lock off. Inside the small room, which was dusty and draped in spiderwebs, sat a large military-style metal trunk from many decades ago. The metal was rusted in spots, and along its edges were dark stains that looked a lot like old, dried blood. The trunk was also locked, sealed by an old mechanism that had rusted shut over time. Martinez called his supervisor, who then called the police. By that afternoon, the Millbrook Police Department had contacted state investigators, who then brought in the FBI. Special Agent Patricia Wells, now 5 years older and feeling the strain of many unsolved cases, stood inside the storage room looking at the trunk. A deep sense of dread came over her. She already knew in her heart what they were going to find inside. The trunk was taken to the state crime lab in Denver. There, forensic experts spent hours carefully working to open the rusted lock without harming any potential evidence inside. When the lid was finally lifted, the room went quiet. On top of everything lay Emily's travel journal. Its leather cover was stained and bent out of shape, but it was still easy to identify. Underneath it was Jake's camera. It wasn't his primary digital camera, but the vintage film camera he had bought just for their trip, the kind that uses real film, which he saved for important moments. There was also the flower crown Emily had worn in their Instagram photos, now dried out and fragile. Jake's sneakers were there too, stained with something dark that had soaked into the fabric long ago and dried. A plastic bag held Jake's backup memory cards. At the very bottom of the trunk, each sealed in its own evidence bag, were items that made the forensic team exchange serious and troubled looks. These were personal things that had clearly come from other victims, from other trips, from other lives that had ended too soon. Using gloved hands, Agent Wells opened Emily's journal. She turned to the final entry. Emily's handwriting, which was usually tidy and careful, was unsteady and rushed. It read, June 22nd night. Something's wrong here. Jake thinks I'm being paranoid, but I've seen the same man 3 times today. First in the diner at lunch, then at the gas station. Now he was in the motel lobby when we checked in. He keeps staring at us, not just looking, staring like he's studying us. Jake says, it's a small town. We're bound to see the same people, but this feels different. I'm scared. We aren't alone here. He keeps walking past our door. I hear footsteps stopping, then starting again. I don't want to worry Sarah, but if something happens. The writing stopped in the middle of the sentence. The rest of the page was blank. Jake's camera had 4 rolls of film inside. 3 of them were completely ruined by moisture and time, but 1 roll, tucked deeper into the camera, had partly survived. A photo specialist at the lab worked patiently to develop the images that could be saved. Most were too damaged to make out, just faint shadows and chemical stains where Jake's photos had once been. But 6 images were still partly visible. The first 3 were clearly from their trip, Emily laughing at a roadside attraction, a sunset over open farmland, the welcome sign for Clear Creek. They were normal vacation pictures, matching what the couple had posted online. The 4th photo showed the Valley Pines Motel at night, taken from inside their room looking out. The parking lot was poorly lit by a single security light. You could see the shape of their Honda Civic and 1 other vehicle, a dark pickup truck. The 5th picture was blurry, taken in bad light. It showed the motel hallway. The camera was held at a low angle, as if Jake had been trying to stay hidden. In the corner of the frame was a shadow that looked like a person, but unclear. The 6th and last photo was the most unsettling. It was taken from what seemed to be the same hallway, and it showed a figure moving toward the camera. The image was too damaged to see the face, but the shape of a large man was clear, and he was holding something that could have been keys or something worse. These photos were taken hours after Emily's last journal entry. Jake had clearly shared her fear and had begun trying to document what was making them nervous. The camera's timestamp showed the last photo was taken at 2:17 a.m. on June 23rd, just a few hours before the motel clerk assumed they had left early. The blood evidence told a story no one wanted to hear. DNA tests confirmed that the blood in the trunk belonged to both Jake and Emily. There was so much of it that the injuries were likely severe, maybe even fatal. But there were also other DNA traces in the trunk, older samples that matched other missing persons, Michael Torres from 2003 and Lisa Reeves from 2007. The evidence pointed to the trunk being used again and again by the same person for the same horrible reason. The forensic team discovered 1 clear fingerprint on the inside of the trunk's lid. It was faded but still usable. They searched every database they had, criminal records, military service files, employment history. Nothing matched. The person who left that print had never been arrested, never served in the military, never held a job that required a background check. They were a ghost. The trunk itself offered more clues. Serial numbers showed it was made in 1987 and sold in military surplus stores. The lock was old and likely original. This was not something acquired recently. Someone had owned this trunk for a very long time. Most disturbing of all were the signs of changes made inside the trunk. Someone had added metal loops that could be used as restraints, and ventilation holes that had been drilled out and covered with mesh. This was not a crime done in a moment of anger. This was a tool, carefully built and kept ready over many years. Agent Wells stood in the lab, looking at all the evidence laid out on the tables. After so many years in law enforcement, she believed she had seen every kind of evil. But this was different. The cold planning, the careful hunting, the deliberate targeting of innocent people traveling along Route 6. Someone had been using that highway as their own private hunting ground for 20 years. The break in the case came from somewhere unexpected. A retired motel owner named Margaret Clearwater read about the story in the Denver Post and called the FBI tip line. "I think I know that trunk," she said. Margaret had run the Sunset Motel in Cedar Falls from 1985 until 2010. She remembered a maintenance worker named Thomas Briggs very well. He had worked for her for 15 years. He was dependable, kept to himself, and always did his job. But something about him had always made her uncomfortable. "He knew too much about the guests," Margaret explained to Agent Wells. "He would mention things about people staying there, things he shouldn't have known, who was traveling by themselves, who might have cash, who seemed vulnerable or lost." Margaret remembered the trunk clearly. Briggs had kept it in her motel's maintenance shed for several years in the late 1990s and early 2000s. "He told me it held family heirlooms, things he didn't have space for in his cabin." Her voice trembled slightly as she added, "I helped him move it once. It was so heavy. He had claimed it was full of his father's old military equipment. But now," she said, "I can't help but wonder if it was already full of something else." The timeline was coming together. Briggs had used the trunk for years, storing it at different places where he worked. When Margaret sold her motel in 2010, he moved the trunk to the Red Haven Lodge, which had already been closed for years. It was the perfect spot to hide something. But why had he left it behind? Why not destroy it completely? Agent Wells had a theory. She explained to the families that killers like this often keep trophies. They want to be able to look back on what they've done, to relive the power they felt. But they also need to keep those things hidden. An abandoned motel was ideal, secluded but still within reach. Now the most urgent question remained: was Thomas Briggs still alive? Was he still hunting? Was he still adding to his collection? The FBI began a nationwide search for Thomas Briggs, but finding him was like trying to catch a ghost. He had not used his Social Security number since 2017. He had no credit cards, no bank accounts, and no record of any job. He had vanished completely from the system. Detectives looked into his past. Thomas Briggs was born in 1956 in the countryside of Wyoming. He had lived a life that seemed normal on the surface. He finished high school but did not go to college. He worked different jobs with his hands, like in construction, maintenance, and repairs. He never married and had no children. His parents passed away in the 1990s, leaving him with no family. However, people who lived near his cabin in Cedar Falls described a different man. They said Briggs was strange and kept to himself. He usually worked at night and slept during the day. Neighbors would sometimes see him early in the morning, loading or unloading heavy things from his truck, but he was never friendly enough for anyone to ask what he was doing. "He made me feel nervous," said Janet Torres, who lived a quarter-mile away. "He would drive by my house at any time of day or night. He never waved or even seemed to see anyone. My husband told me I was just being scared for no reason, but I felt there was something not right about that man." The most frightening find was inside his cabin. When agents got permission to search it, they discovered it had been thoroughly cleaned. Every surface was washed, and every personal belonging was gone. But in the basement, they found something Briggs had forgotten. It was a detailed map of Route 6, covered with colored pins. Red pins marked spots where people had disappeared. Yellow pins showed motels where he had worked in maintenance. Blue pins marked places where victims' cars had been discovered. The map stretched the whole length of Route 6, from Massachusetts to California. There were more red pins than the FBI had known about, which likely meant there were more victims no one had connected to Briggs. At the bottom of the map, written neatly by hand, was a list of names. Jake Warren and Emily Carter were on that list. So were all the other known victims, but there were 12 names in total. The FBI had only found 8 victims. Somewhere in America, 4 more families might be waiting for answers without even knowing they needed them. When the news about the map came out, it became a story the whole country followed. Cable news channels reported on the case. True crime podcasters discussed every piece of information. Social media was filled with ideas and guesses. The story had everything that draws people in: young love, a cross-country trip that ended terribly, and a serial killer who had stayed hidden for years. The difference between Jake and Emily's happy posts on Instagram and their scary final moments created a story that millions could not stop thinking about. Sarah Carter Warren, she had taken her sister's last name to honor her, became well known even though she did not want to be. Every news organization asked her for interviews. She did them all, hoping that the attention might bring new information. Emily was the most careful person I ever knew, Sarah said on a national morning program. She looked into everything and made plans for everything. She would not have chosen to put herself in danger. Someone took that choice from her. The publicity brought in hundreds of tips. Most were not helpful. People said they had seen Jake and Emily in places they could not have been, or shared ideas based on crime shows they watched. But a few tips gave important clues. A truck driver named Bill Patterson called to say he had seen Thomas Briggs at a truck stop in Nevada in late 2019. Briggs was driving a different vehicle, not his old pickup truck, but a newer van with dark windows. "I knew who he was from the pictures on the news," Patterson said. "He was filling up gas cans, not just his tank, like he was getting ready for a long trip to a place with no people." A store clerk in Utah remembered selling camping gear to a man who looked like Briggs in early 2020. "He bought everything you would need to live out in the wild for months," she said. "Water purification tablets, canned food, propane tanks. He paid cash for all of it." The clues pointed west, toward the huge wild areas of Nevada and California, where a person could hide for years without being discovered. As the search grew wider, Agent Wells and her team worked to put faces to the extra names on Briggs's list. They used missing person files and old police reports to learn who they were. There was Jessica Hoffman, a graduate student who disappeared in 2005 while driving across the country for a job interview. Her car was found in Arizona, far from where she was supposed to be. There were Ryan and Ashley Moore, a married couple who vanished in 2009 during a road trip for their honeymoon. Their families always thought they had crashed in the mountains, but their bodies were never recovered. There was Alex Chin, a journalist who disappeared in 2016 while working on a story about small towns along old highways. Each new name brought more sadness to more families, but it also made everyone more determined to find the truth. The victims were no longer just names. They were real people, with real lives and dreams that had been taken from them. Emily's parents, Robert and Linda Carter, began a foundation to help the families of missing people. They worked with other victims' families to pay for private detectives, push for more police resources, and support people living through the same nightmare they knew too well. "We cannot bring Emily back," Linda said at the foundation's first news conference, "but maybe we can help other families find their answers faster." Jake's father, David Warren, handled things differently. He was a software engineer, so he taught himself all about digital clues and data study. He spent his time looking through social media, traffic camera videos, and phone records, searching for clues the police might have overlooked. "There has to be a digital path somewhere," he said. "No one vanishes in 2017 without leaving some kind of electronic mark." His constant focus worried his wife, but she understood. He needed to do something to feel like they were not just powerless against another person's cruelty. David Warren's hard work finally led to a discovery. Using information from cell phone towers that he got through public records requests, He tracked the movement of Jake and Emily's phones on their last day. The phones last connected to towers near Clear Creek at 11:52 p.m. on June 22, 5 minutes after Emily sent her last text. But what was important was that the phones had moved. Between midnight and 3 a.m., the phones traveled 37 miles east, connecting to towers along Route 6 in a way that showed they were in a moving vehicle. The last connection was from a tower near the Red Haven Lodge at 2:43 a.m. After that, there was nothing. The phones had either lost power or were broken. Someone drove from the Valley Pines Motel to the Red Haven Lodge in the middle of the night, David explained to Agent Wells, and they had Jake and Emily's phones with them. This was the first solid proof connecting the two motels. It suggested that whoever took Jake and Emily had moved them from where they were staying to the abandoned motel where their things were later found. But it also created more questions. Why the Red Haven Lodge? What was important about that place? And what took place during those 3 hours between the motels? David's study also showed something else that was concerning. The movement of the cell phones was not random. The vehicle had made exact stops along the way, waiting for 10 to 15 minutes at places that matched other motels where victims had disappeared. It was as if someone was looking for something at each spot or visiting places that held dark memories. Following David Warren's digital evidence, investigators started looking closely at all the abandoned motels along the Route 6 corridor. What they found was a web of forgotten places that had become perfect hiding spots for someone who knew the area well. The Sunset Valley Motor Lodge had been closed since 2006. Police found signs that someone had been using the empty rooms not long ago, sleeping bags, canned food, and evidence of camping. The Desert Winds Motel had shut down in 2011. The manager's office held maps and notebooks with detailed notes about guests who had stayed there years before. The Pine Ridge Inn had been empty since 2015. In its basement, investigators found a workshop set up with tools for picking locks, copying keys, and changing vehicles. Thomas Briggs had not just been killing people. He had been creating a system to help him hunt. These old motels were stopping points where he could keep victims, hide evidence, and plan what to do next. The size of it was overwhelming. This was not just a serial killer. This was a person who had spent years building the perfect way to make people vanish. Agent Wells understood they were no longer just hunting one man. They were taking apart a whole system of evil that had been working in the open for 20 years. But Briggs himself was still a ghost. Every clue seemed to end at another empty building, another closed bank account, or another fake name that led to nothing. Another important clue came from a surprise source: a parking ticket. Agent Wells's team had been studying traffic camera footage from truck stops and rest areas across western states, hopping to find Briggs's van. It was slow, boring work, thousands of hours of blurry video, searching for one vehicle among millions. But in September 2023, a young analyst named Kevin Park saw something interesting in footage from a rest area outside Bakersfield, California. A dark van with Nevada license plates was parked for several hours in the overnight section. The license plate was partly covered with mud, but after using computers to make the image clearer, they could see enough numbers to search. The van had been given 3 parking tickets in the last year, twice in California and once in Oregon, always for parking against the rules in remote places. The tickets were given to a Robert Mitchell with an address in Eureka, California. But when agents checked, they found Robert Mitchell had died in 2019. Someone was using his identity. The address led to a worn-out trailer park outside Eureka, surrounded by redwood forests. The trailer registered to Robert Mitchell was at the very end of the park, partly hidden by thick trees. When the special team surrounded the trailer on October 3, 2023, they thought it would be empty, like every other place they had searched. But smoke was rising from the chimney. Somebody was inside. Thomas Briggs stepped out of his trailer into the damp morning air, his hands held high in surrender. At 67 years old, he appeared even more aged and worn. He was thin, with a beard, and dressed in clothes that were old and tired. He made no attempt to flee or put up a fight. He simply stood there in the mist, looking at the circle of federal agents surrounding him with a face that seemed more than anything to show a sense of release. In a soft voice, he told them, "I've been waiting for you." For Agent Wells, a person who had arrested countless criminals over her career, this was something entirely new. Most murderers she encountered would either completely deny their actions or try to explain why they were somehow right. Briggs was different. He just nodded quietly as they told him his rights, acting like this was a moment he had known would come for a very long time. When investigators entered his trailer, they discovered a carefully organized record of his terrible acts. There were photo albums packed with pictures of his victims, not only Jake and Emily, but all 12 people he had killed. The photos were taken before, during, and after their deaths, images so disturbing they would stay with the investigators forever. There were also journals, written in the same precise handwriting they had seen on the Route 6 map, which described in detail how he chose his victims, watched them, and planned their kidnappings. The most horrifying part, however, was his plans for the future. He had lists of people he was considering as new victims, motels he was thinking of using as future hunting grounds, and routes carefully drawn out across the entire western United States. Thomas Briggs was not done. He was only just beginning. Inside an interview room at the FBI's office in Sacramento, Thomas Briggs told his story with the calm and disconnected tone of a person talking about the forecast. Agent Wells had to keep reminding herself that the man sitting across from her was openly confessing to 12 murders. He said it all began in 2003. He was working a maintenance job at a motel when he met Michael Torres, a young college student who was traveling by himself. Something about the young man's innocence and lack of protection sparked a dark impulse inside Briggs. He explained in a voice that was strangely empty of emotion that the student was so trusting, so certain the world was a good and safe place. Briggs said, "I wanted to show him how wrong he was." That first killing was messy and not well thought out, but Briggs learned he had a talent for making people vanish without a trace. As the years passed, he improved his methods, learning from his errors, and built up his network of deserted motels that he used as his private hunting territory. He focused on couples and solo travelers just passing through the area, people who wouldn't be missed right away. He studied their social media updates, their travel habits, and their personal weaknesses. Jake and Emily had drawn his attention because they were sharing every part of their trip online for everyone to see. They were showing the entire world exactly where they were and where they were headed next. He said this made them incredibly easy to follow. For 3 full days, he followed their journey along Route 6. When they stopped in Clear Creek, he used a master key to quietly enter their motel room during the night. His voice stayed flat and unfeeling as he described making certain that they would never walk out of that room alive. Afterward, he carefully prepared their bodies, wrapping them securely in thick plastic, and then placing them inside an old metal trunk that he kept specifically for that job. "The room was spotless when I left," he mentioned, with a slight smile. "But I guess you always leave a little something behind." That little something was what investigators would later discover: tiny splashes of red bloodstain on the trunk's edges, almost impossible to see after so many years in storage. It was the single mistake he ever made. Agent Wells had to walk out of the room 2 separate times during his confession. Even after decades of facing the worst things people can do, this calm and casual evil was too much to bear. Briggs then took investigators to the isolated spots where he had left his victims' bodies, places scattered throughout the wild areas of Colorado, Utah, Nevada, and California. He led them to 12 graves that had remained hidden for years. Jake and Emily were discovered in a canyon outside of Moab, Utah. They had been buried together. Even in death, they were still holding on to one another. The other victims were recovered one after another. Michael Torres was found in the mountains of Colorado. The Reeves couple were located in a Nevada desert. Rachel Martinez was found in a California forest. Each family was finally given the answers they had been desperately seeking for years. At Jake's gravesite, investigators found his main camera, the digital one he had used to document their entire trip. Somehow, it had survived. The memory card held hundreds of pictures from their adventure, images full of the joy and love they shared right up to their final moments. Emily's parents asked that the last photos never be given to the media. Those final moments of their daughter's life, they said, belonged to the family, not to public fascination. Sarah Carter Warren traveled to the grave in Utah. She brought flowers, sunflowers, because they were Emily's favorite, and also brought Jake's last roll of film that had never been developed, the one the police had kept as evidence. She looked at the graves and whispered, "You found each other, and you never let go. That's love." Jake and Emily were finally given a peaceful resting place. Their families chose to bury them together in a small cemetery near Emily's hometown in Massachusetts. Their gravestone reads simply, "Jake Warren and Emily Carter, together forever. Love conquers all." Thomas Briggs admitted he was guilty of every charge. To avoid receiving the death penalty, he gave full details about each of his crimes and helped find the remains of every single victim. The court gave him 12 life sentences, one after the other, with no chance of ever being released. Given his age, this meant he would die in prison, forgotten by everyone except the families whose lives he had shattered. The trial did not bring any sense of peace or satisfaction to the families. The legal system had done its job, but it could not return the people they had loved and lost. It could not give back the years spent worrying, or the countless nights spent awake, haunted by nightmares of what might have happened. Thomas Briggs died in his prison cell in January of 2024, just 8 months after being found guilty. He died alone from a heart attack, and no one mourned his passing. He took all his remaining secrets with him.